Either you're in charge of your own destiny or someone else's, and it shouldn't be hard to work out which is best for you. We're now 4 months into a GNU, and we've got a chance to reflect on where we now are as a country. And I think all reasonable people will accept we're much better off with this GNU than with the alternative, which would be the so-called doomsday coalition of the ANC, EFF and MK. But I think it's also now clear for everyone to see that the GNU is not a cure-all. And one lesson that people should be learning is just how essential the right to self-determination has become. And I want to look at 3 examples where we can clearly demonstrate this. And for the first one, I want to stay here in the Western Cape, where the DA have an outright majority in the provincial parliament. And they have the option of asserting the Western Cape people's right to self-determination by passing a Western Cape People's Bill. And Premier Alan Winde has spent the last 4 months complaining non-stop. He's upset because the Western Cape isn't receiving its fair share of funding from the national government, and he's right, it isn't. He's upset because the national government has imposed a public wage settlement on the Western Cape, but not provided the funding to pay for it. And he's right again. And he's upset because, or despite a rapidly expanding population, he's now had to cut more than 2,400 teaching posts. And again, he's right to be upset. And he's declared an intergovernmental dispute. But the reality is this: Alan Winde might as well be talking to a brick wall because he's fighting from a position of weakness. I'd like to put this into context. The Western Cape government, on balance, net, pays 300 billion rand a year more into the state coffers than it gets back out, and Premier Winde is fighting for just 4 billion rand of the 300 billion rand that we give to the rest of the country. And by passing the Western Cape People's Bill, Premier Winde would be able to transform the Western Cape people from being a people at the mercy of the national government's every whim into a people lawfully entitled to make their own decisions. And self-determination would allow the Western Cape people to fight from a position of strength, whether they want more control over their money, greater autonomy, or even independence. And the question now must be, why on earth would the Western Cape not assert its right to self-determination? Now, the second example I'd like to look at is Tshwane, and in this context, particularly the Afrikaners community. And Pretoria has the highest concentration of Afrikaners anywhere in South Africa. But Gauteng Premier Panyazi Lesufi is overtly antagonistic towards Afrikaners. And in the first 4 months of the GNU, things have got much worse for them in Pretoria. Despite their protests, President Ramaphosa has now signed the Bella Bill into law, removing the only legal protection that single-medium Afrikaans schools had. And then the ANC removed Tshwane Mayor Cilliers Brink, who'd signed an agreement with Afrikaners to work together to maintain the city. And Afrikaners in Tshwane are now once again at the mercy of the ANC. And self-determination would allow Afrikaners to take control of their own communities, including their own schools. For my final example, I want to go to the Zulu people. Now, that the majority of Zulus would vote for Jacob Zuma is quite beyond me. But the bottom line is that the majority of them did vote for Jacob Zuma. And Zuma championed traditional Zulu values and a rejection of Western constitutional democracy. And Zuma's MK gained 37 out of 80 seats, with the IFP being the next largest party getting only 15. But the IFP, the ANC and the DA worked together to deny the Zulu people their democratic will. Now, personally, I'm delighted for the people of KZN that they did. But if I were Zulu, I would be asking, why on earth have the Zulu people not asserted their right to self-determination to ensure that they can be governed the way that they wanted to be governed. Now, a lot of people are very upset with Phil Craig and the Referendum Party. They say that we're talking about things they would rather left unsaid. And many of those will now be screaming that we're just trying to break South Africa apart. But that's not what we're trying to do. Self-determination does not necessarily mean independence. And more often than not, self-determination is exercised within a state and not through secession. But what self-determination does do is put communities in charge of their own decisions. And from there, they can then negotiate their place within the South African state from a position of power. For most, independence is then a last resort, and people will only ever seek it if the state refuses to act in their best interest. But the bottom line is this. Self-determination is now essential for all communities in South Africa. And it's only a matter of time before some of those communities start claiming it. And when they do, South Africa will become a fairer and more democratic country, or countries, for us all. Thank you.